Started. Awesome. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We are so glad to have you here with us on behalf of the Organizational Leaders in Action. As you know us as OLA, we're really excited to bring you another night full of wonderful words and wisdom to really aid in the rest of our doctoral journey. If you joined us last Thursday, you heard some amazing words and insights shared from Dr. Gonzalez, and Dr. Sweet sprinkled a few words here and there to really add on to what was shared. But overall, that was a very impactful session. It really just helps to kind of, I don't want to say fill a gap, but it helps us to keep the conversation going and answer some of the questions that we may have outside of the classroom, because we're limited in the time that we have with each other on Zoom. So having sessions like this and just creating spaces for us to gather, since we can't really do it in person, has really helped us to form those relationships, but also build our confidence as we go through this program. So I'm glad to see that we have some more representation from cohort 7 here with us tonight. It's really exciting to see you guys getting this knowledge at such an early stage in the program. So with all that being said, I just want to quickly highlight those who are here with us this evening. So my name is Jovan Fernandez. All of you know me by now, but I serve as the president for OLA. I'm going to pass it over to Matthew.
Good evening, everyone. Matthew Roman. I am the Vice President of OLA.
Rich.
Rich Jankowski, Treasurer of OLA.
And Aaron.
Hi, everybody. I'm a member of OLA, and I am the Treasurer of the Graduate Student Council.
Awesome. Thank you all. And then I see our advisor is in the room. So greetings, Dr. Sweet. Always nice to see you here joining us, along with folks from cohort 6 and cohort 7. Thank you all. So now I'm going to pass it over to our special guest for this evening. Tonight, we are joined by adjunct instructor of the Organizational Leadership Program, Dr. Kevin Coopersmith, who is a familiar face, who has come to speak with us during some of our class sessions, and we had the opportunity to read through your dissertation and learn more from you. And really, as Marianne alluded to before the recording started, use your work as a guide to help us in some of the work that we do. So thank you for serving as a resource, but also thank you in advance for the great information you're going to share with us tonight. So we look forward to hearing the helpful tips on how to begin this dissertation writing process. Last week, we focused on how to collect the data, how to really narrow down your research topics. And now that we have that, where do we go from here? How do we start this process? And the burning question that I say cohort 6 probably has at this moment is, what does our relationship with our DIP chair look like? How do we work with them? We are 2 months away from embarking on that phase in the program. So we are really excited and anxious to know more about that. So with that being said, I will pass it over to you, Dr. Coopersmith. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. But you know, this is a safe space and a brave space. So let's have fun, let's ask the questions, and let's just learn all that we can while we have these great folks in the room with us tonight. So the floor is all yours.
All right, thanks so much for the introduction, and I'm really glad to be here today. So I am going to dive in on screen share, and we'll see if my Zoom skills have gotten any better or worse over the years. Can everybody see my screen now, the PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
So it's kind of a superstition with Zoom. You always have to go ahead and ask, can everybody see this when you screen share your PowerPoint? So now that we're past that point, we can get started. So one of the things I really want to do first, before we dive in, I know I've had the pleasure of meeting some of you already that are here, but I did want to just introduce myself briefly before moving forward. So my name is Kevin Coopersmith. I am a member of cohort 3, and I started my journey into a dissertation and into doctoral research very similar to how you guys all did. I was really, you know, starting out as a student, really looking for some context. The program was an excellent fit for me and was able to really help me get started in a lot of ways with my career. And basically, once I got started with research, It wasn't always the easiest process, and sometimes it took me a little while to get going. And that's one of the reasons that I really love to be here tonight, or to be a resource for people in the program, because research didn't always come naturally to me, but through the process, I really kind of fell in love with it. And I really found a knack for the area that I was researching and the work that I wanted to do in the future. So I work as an employee at Stockton. I'm an adjunct instructor in business studies currently. And I also work within the doctorate program as a dissertation chair. So I have been a dissertation chair since a little under a year ago. I started that work. Before then, I served in a TA capacity, working with cohort 4 on their dissertations. And then the opportunity arose for me to start working directly as a chair. It was wonderful. And you met my mentor, Dr. Sonia Gonzalez, last week. In her session, she was my chair, and she really helped me to really get started with so many of these things and understand research as a whole. And one of the things that really positioned me well with my research experience is I was able to really find a study that really related well to me and really resonated with me, which was the area of personal development planning in a VUCA world. I really loved the idea of personal development at the time when we were kind of forming ideas. I knew I wanted to do personal development very early on, and that vertical leadership development also really spoke to me as a person. So once things got rolling, it seemed logical to head in that direction, although the road to get there wasn't the easiest one. As we'll talk about today, oftentimes with a dissertation topic, you kind of start out with all this passion and creativity, and one of the steps is figuring out a way to make it actionable and to actually do a study around. I was throwing all types of ideas at the wall at the time, and thankfully, through a lot of the support of the lead faculty, I was able to narrow down and get on track, and ultimately successfully complete my dissertation. And since then, it kind of lit an itch for me for doing further research. So based on my dissertation findings, I've been writing a couple articles over the last several months. My first article was personal development planning and vertical leadership development in a VUCA world, which I did successfully get published in the peer review article, or the peer review journal, the Journal of Values-Based Leadership last year. And I actually just received word about 2 days ago that my paper and presentation was accepted for the Eastern Academy of Management's annual conference in May, which was, again, a paper that I spun off my dissertation. It wasn't exactly my first paper was very much, here's what I wrote about, and kind of a retelling, whereas the second one was about me taking things a little bit further. Everything really came from the work that I did in the program. And now I've been able to translate that into the start of ideally a long-lasting academic career and a strong role in research. And that's a really great thing about what dissertations can do for you. And that's something that I really want to talk to you all about tonight, is the power of a dissertation when it's really connected to an area that you're passionate about, and when it really aligns to your career and your career goals. So to give you a little idea about tonight, I'm going to do kind of an overview, as Jovan mentioned, just kind of an overview of the dissertation practice. My goal in doing this is to kind of do it informally, because you will be receiving a lot of guidance within the program. And a lot of you in cohort 6 already have received some of that guidance towards like the real deadlines and formation of everything that you're going to do. What I want to try to open this up for tonight is kind of more of a casual run through of what you're going to be going through over the next 1.5 years or 2.5 years for cohort 7, and really just get a good feedback from you and kind of a good conversation in terms of where everyone's at, what kind of clarification you may need on the experience overall, and how I and other members of the lead faculty can help you out. So at any time in this process, please feel free to ask questions. I have the chat open. Well, actually, that's a reminder for myself to open the chat. I have the chat open for basically anybody that prefers to write in chat, or if you're in the video version of Zoom and you want to speak out and raise your hand, or just cut in at any point, feel free. One thing to mention, just to keep in mind, this is something that's true for tonight and really true for any session that you find yourself in the program when it comes to discussing the dissertation. everybody has different understandings of research. Everybody is coming at this from a completely different level of experience. Some people are very experienced. For a lot of people, you may have already done a dissertation for your master's degree to the point where a lot of this comes naturally for you, whereas other people, this might be your first research paper in several years, let alone something as comprehensive as a dissertation. So towards that end, one thing I always encourage is there's really no wrong questions. Feel free to open up and ask anything. One of the things that can really happen frequently with the dissertation, especially with us dip chairs that are always kind of entrenched in it, is we may use some terminology and some references that may not always make sense and may seem really intuitive to us because we're always in it, but they may be new terms or things that you're not familiar with yet. And towards that end, there's really never any harm in cutting me off or another instructor and saying, hey, well, what do you mean by that? You know, is that the same as this thing, or where are we at here? So just wanted to do this little rundown just to let you guys know what to expect today as we move forward. So basically, I want to just start with a real top-down explanation of what a dissertation in practice is, because the phrase isn't always used to describe a dissertation. A lot of programs go for more theoretical based dissertations, and one of the things that gives our doctorate program such a strong practitioner focus is the concept of a dissertation in practice. And what really drives that idea is that we all are leaders in different capacities in different organizations and different experiences and ways of life. And one thing that makes it so unique is we are not going to just conduct a typical research study for our dissertation. We are going to actively try to look at the world around us, our organization, our context, the world that surrounds us on a daily basis, and really dive into some of the issues that we see in our own experience. And that's what really sets a dissertation in practice apart from a regular dissertation, where a dissertation itself is always a research study with an accompanying paper that really represents the culmination of a doctoral or a graduate student's journey. But a dissertation in practice really strengthens that concept of what we all are in this program at our core, which are practitioner leaders on top of researchers. And towards that end, we're really not just worried about, okay, here's this issue that exists in research, let's contribute to it. But it's also about identifying issues that we see in our world, that take place in our organization, that take place in the experiences around us, that we want to do more about and we want to enact change with. And towards that end, the dissertation in practice is one of the most powerful tools and powerful things that you will do to develop your career, develop your identity as both an academic and as a leader, and position yourself moving forward in whatever field you are most experienced with, to be an expert on a given topic and to really work to try to make the world a better place, to put it a little bit kind of pie in the sky, a little bit positive. That's really what you do in a dissertation in practice. You address issues in your organization or in an industry that is connected to your organization or your experience, and find ways to understand this issue better and influence change. And we've had a lot of really tremendous things come out of doctoral students' journeys from doing their dissertations to really work to make that lasting change in the real world. So you're still doing a dissertation based in a strong theoretical concept, conducting a lot of solid research, conducting a very thorough and robust research study to support everything. But the spirit and goal of coming up with something that actively helps to make the world better, that actively helps to address an organizational or societal issue, is really what sets our dissertation experience apart, and what really ultimately can make it more rewarding for you as individuals as you move on in your careers, both during the dissertation and afterwards. How's everybody doing so far? Everybody good? Cool. So I do want to just provide, this is not a way that it's structured specifically in the program, but it's a way that made a lot of sense to me, and I kind of wanted to present it to you in terms of what you're going to be going through over the next year and a half, or again for cohort 7, 2.5 years, as you develop things. And the dissertation kind of takes place in 3 different stages, where stage 1 is something that really even cohort 7 has begun to some degree, which is all about idea creation and development. So much of what you do, especially for cohort 6 now, because you're moving into your first class where you're going to be writing chapter 1 of your dissertation, and especially as you move into the summer, working on chapter 2 and moving on throughout the course of this year, so much of what you're doing is really about just giving life to everything that you're going through and coming up with a dissertation concept that is actionable and that there is a strong need to address. So I'm going to break down where I was at in my experience to show you guys first and foremost that the idea creation and storming is really important, but also that, you know, I feel like I'm here and invited, you know, to speak as somebody who's gotten through this process, but that this was not a streamlined process for me. And although I really liked writing and I had a background in research, I really struggled with this idea because one of the hardest things when you're really coming up with a dissertation topic is not just about saying, what am I passionate about and what really relates to my career? It's also about what can I do that's reasonable and actionable and something that can be accomplished reasonably in one paper and one study. So what that meant to me is I knew early on I wanted to do personal development. It was an area that really interested me. I absolutely loved vertical leadership development. Everything in that really drove and connected to me to know that I wanted personal development to be a big part of my career and my research. But the problem was I wanted to do like everything on personal development. I had these ideas that my study was going to really explore the ways in which leaders can grow holistically as individuals by not just expanding their skill set, as we talk about like with horizontal leadership development, but expanding their lifestyle choice. I wanted to look into things like diet, nutrition, exercise, quality of life management, reflection, mentorship, menteeship. I had all these ideas written down in my paper, like as we were starting to formulate those original days of thinking about your dissertation that you as cohort 6 are kind of in. And I was like, this is my dissertation. I'm going to do this. And one of the faculty members at the time told me basically, you know, this is a career and not a dissertation, that if you want to do all these things, this is great, but you're going to be working on your dissertation through your 50s if you want to dive into that sense. So I needed to kind of, in this phase, reel it in a bit. And part of that was a little challenging too, because you also want to stick with what you love. But for me, this meant, all right, what's the most important things? What can I realistically accomplish with the study? And how can I get there? And that's how I really started to explore exactly, Jovin, yes, that more than a couple times she had to reel me in through the process. So what this kind of early stage represents, and really what it should represent for all you guys as you go through, is a lot of storming like that, throwing a lot of ideas on the wall, not being afraid to say, well, what happens if I do this? What about if I change my idea? One of the things that can happen at this early stage is that you get an idea in your head and it seems reasonable, and all of a sudden you marry yourself to it. And then the experience doesn't really play out in practice. Your career might change, your context around your work might change, and you might end up feeling like, hey, this really doesn't work for me at all. And towards that end, it's perfectly normal and natural for that to happen. One thing that happened, this was a huge shift in my cohort in particular. We began our research studies in March 2020, exactly when COVID started. And so many people had studies based around human attendance at different places and interviewing people in person and having focus groups. And it rattled so many dissertations that we went through at the time, because so many people were getting ready literally to get started days before COVID hit and lockdown started and protocols changed everywhere. And a lot of people had to reimagine their dissertations then. Sometimes people get so far as really working into their study itself before they want to see a change. So one of the things that I want to highlight during this first phase is that there's so much value in being willing to be flexible. There's so much value in exploring things with your colleagues, with your faculty members, bouncing your ideas around in work, because this is kind of the storming phase where you're really developing things and nothing should really be viewed as set in stone. And that's really the journey that you're going to go through for cohort 6 over the next year, or at least until December of this year. before you begin the actual dissertation and practice classes and you end the coursework of the program, is just developing ideas. And one of the big parts about this is conducting a very thorough literature review, seeing the conversations that are coming on these topics that are out there, and really connecting things to what you're doing and what you want to do. So that phase exists for a while now. By the end of this phase, by the end of December, cohort 6, you'll have developed 3 chapters of your dissertation, which the dissertation itself is only 5 chapters long. So you will develop essentially a working model for everything that you're going to do before you actually do it, with a strong understanding of the research and what's going to happen. So a lot of change will happen at this stage. And it's kind of natural for your study to evolve and for you to kind of adjust things as you go through this point in time. Then when we hit stage 2, things get a little more solid and set in stone and really position you to move forward with everything else that you're doing. At this point in time, which for cohort 6, this would be the spring semester of next year. This is when things get a little serious. You've completed all the coursework at this time. You're officially moved on to ABD status, all but dissertation status as a doctoral student, and you are solely working on a one-to-one basis with your dissertation chair on developing and refining your materials. So what happens at this point is you go back through chapters 1, 2, and 3, you refine those chapters and those concepts and all those ideas from the storming phase to make it really set to go. And then you submit the concept for your study to Stockton's Institutional Research Board, which an IRB approval represents the stage in which you're moving forward with your study and saying, here are the things that we're going to do. Here's the roadmap on how I'm going to do it. And here are all the considerations to maintain the study and make sure the study is done in the best possible way, that the participants are protected, that the data is protected, that everything's being handled responsibly and accurately to the best of its ability for the study itself. So once you gain that IRB approval in DIP 1, and that kind of marks the culmination of the DIP 1, a lot of that, oh, change your mind and oh, change your path, a lot of things get moved aside because now you've gained formal approval to do your study and you're going to make less changes to what you've done and your roadmap's going to stay more solid. But what it also means is that for the first time, you're going to receive approval basically saying, if you conduct this study exactly the way that you've lined out and you write your paper and you do everything well, you'll have completed your dissertation, which is a really exciting step in everything that happens. So then you go out, you conduct your research, and then step 3 begins, where after your research is all done, you've gathered your information, you then work with your dissertation chair to write the final 2 chapters of your dissertation, to analyze your results, to come up with key findings, and ultimately prepare for and successfully, ideally successfully on the first shot, everybody's going to get through and do great, then prepare and defend your dissertation itself. So that's a lot. And again, I'm going to throw a lot at you tonight, and then we can kind of break everything down. But as we look at that process, was there any concerns that come up in that? Did anything come up as questions? Anything that wasn't clear, or how are you guys doing with that? Okay, so far? Cool. So this slide will just be a breakdown of the parts of the dissertation and practice itself, because again, we've talked about 5 chapters and they all kind of sound a little ambiguous in what they mean. So I just want to take a little time to break them all down and just give you an idea of what's to come and what this really represents in terms of this 5 chapter model. Chapter 1 is often considered your most important chapter because it is essentially an outline and rundown of everything that's going to come with your dissertation, in addition to a highlight of some of the key points and a justification of why this research matters and why it's relevant. So for cohort 6, I believe you're getting started or preparing to get started on thinking about this now. Cohort 7, this will happen next year for you right around this time. But chapter 1 is the backbone of your study and the most important chapter. It's also the chapter that you come back to time and time again and edit, even right until once you're done your study and in the final months getting ready for your defense, you're going to be renovating chapter 1, because your chapter 1 is your introduction to your study and everything that you're going to do. This is the chapter where you're going to make a strong case for why your study is important and why this issue needs to be addressed. That's what's referred to as the problem and practice section, where you are going to really identify why this issue exists and why the need happens. So for in the instance of me, I was doing personal development planning in a VUCA world. My big focus was on the large existing and continuously growing skills gap that exists in the world of management today. That that leaders are constantly charged with new tasks and new responsibilities. As we know, VUCA being such a key representation of this, and timeliness for me with my study, because I was writing it as COVID was really starting to rattle our whole society. I was able to make a very strong case to say, hey, look, leaders need more skills than they currently have, basically across the board. And my study was ideally going to, well, it did ideally address what leaders can do to use personal development as a vehicle to address that skills gap. And that's what your problem in practice really is making a strong case for why your study exists and why this is something that needs to be done, not only in general, but now, and why this is the time to do it, essentially. You'll also, okay, so Matt asked in chat, is it a good idea to solidify a topic before class starts, or will students have an opportunity to settle on a topic by the end of the course? I would say it's always helpful to have some ideas, but don't feel married to anything just yet, and don't feel like you need to yet, because things will change as you go through the course load, especially as you get introduced in 6500 on a lot of the materials of the dissertation, the writing, the research, all the processes that go into it overall. It will be, a lot of your ideas may change, or you may just have connections that come together. For my cohort and for me personally, I found some of our best ideas happen just being in that classroom together and just like brainstorming and discussing ideas. And that's a really big thing about those early classes also, is using the cohort model to support your individual journeys with your dissertation by doing a lot of brainstorming sessions and things like that. And I certainly had some rough ideas with my study moving into my first class, which I think is fairly natural, but I would say most of the strength came out of talking to faculty members and talking with my colleagues in my cohort about their dissertation topics, about their goals, and really forming everything from there. So I think having a working idea is helpful, but I think the real beauty of it comes out of the brainstorming and just learning more. And, you know, above all else, putting like pen to paper and really starting to try to write out these chapters and really formulate things and think about what they would look like for you. Chapter 1 really sets the stage for everything that you do. The other big area of chapter 1 that you'll go over a lot in class are your research questions, which usually vary. Oftentimes, I would say maybe the sweet spot is sometime between 2 and 4 research questions. Some studies only have 1, some might have 5 or 6. It depends on the nature of it, but your research questions are essentially what you're setting out to answer and what you're really looking to accomplish in your study and the things that you're hoping to address through your research. And that's really chapter 1, is a really strong overview of everything that you're going to do in the study, highlighting your theoretical concepts that drive things, your theoretical framework, which is essentially a representation of all the key theories or just key theory that drives your study, and connecting it all in a well-composed chapter that really helps to give a strong overview of everything that's to come in your study. So for cohort 6, again, you'll be working on that this spring. Then for chapter 2, the literature review comes out into play. And the literature review is always a very polarizing area of the dissertation. Some people are very great at the literature review, other people struggle with it. It's usually a tricky format to adapt to because so much of the dissertation is about your individual experience. Chapter 2 kind of flips that script, and it's about what everybody else has done on this topic, before you're coming into play. And for anybody that's really written a lot of research papers, more traditional research papers throughout your academic careers, this is going to feel very familiar in a lot of ways, because it's a lot less about your individual voice and experience than the other chapters, and about making sense of the whole picture that exists in this research before you move forward. One of the best analogies that I always botch that came up from one of my early classes on chapter 2 is that chapter 2 is all about setting the table for your study. And this metaphorical table exists. At this metaphorical table is all the great researchers on this topic that have come there before you. And just like any time when you're surrounded by a lot of experts on a topic, you want to take in all their information before you start talking yourself. And that's what chapter 2 is about, is really a strong synthesis of all the research that has come to before you on this topic, and setting the stage for why your study is different, why it's important, and why what you're doing is so relevant. And that's chapter 2. And everybody comes at that from a very different level of experience. Chapter 2 was a bear for me because I really struggled, even though I am a career writer and I love writing. It was very hard for me to shift back into that research paper mindset. And it challenged me for a little while. Thankfully, I learned, and I had great faculty that supported me and gave me really good feedback, but it took some drafts. This was definitely one area that I struggled with, and that a lot of people do, because it's more removed from what you naturally do, and it positions you just a little bit differently in your experience. But once you're done the literature review, you're at a very exciting point, because you've provided an outline for the study itself in chapter 1. And then you've successfully done a lot of thorough research on your topic and made a strong case for why it's relevant. Then you get to move on to chapter 3. Chapter 3 being something that is typically almost always the shortest chapter of the dissertation, but also the one where the words and the context around it really count the most. Okay, Matt asked a really good question out here. And that was, can you share how you chunk your ideas or outline your thought process throughout the literature review? Do you start in the middle and start writing, or outline and fill in? Again, everybody's process will be a little bit different. What worked for me, and this is usually a step that will come up as you work in the summer for this, is that one of your first activities to do with your literature review will be to come up with your headers. Your essential topics that you're going to be covering, and your subtopics that'll go into your dissertation further. And what that really does, and why that's such a really helpful thing early on, is that you're creating a backbone for your research before you even do it. And it's giving you a time to really just outline what you're going to do. So in my case, I knew vertical leadership development was going to be a huge topic. I knew personal development was going to be big, and I knew personal development plans were important, as well as VUCA. I also was really interested in andragogy, which is the study of how adults learn. I wrote like a 10-page literature review on that I ultimately threw out and didn't even need, but that was part of the process also. And I kind of started with just those headers to move forward. Then I started doing research on each of the topics. And once I was doing research on them and picking up articles and really seeing what existed and what didn't, I was able to come up with subheaders. And I was able to kind of break down those big topics into smaller topics to understand where the research covered, what it meant, what really were the connections, and what the gaps were that existed. So it's kind of like a kind of top-down approach, I guess, at least how I took it. Other people may want to just start very organically and say, I want to research change management. I'm going to start by just typing in change management on the Stockton Library database and see where it gets me. But I think having at least some headers as you move into chapter 2 is a really helpful tool. And most dissertation chairs do encourage you to do that, because it just helps you to really see the full picture before you've even really gotten started with anything. But the literature review process is exactly how it sounds. It's a lot of reading. You're going to read a lot of articles. You're going to take in a lot of new perspectives. And one of the biggest things, I won't beat this drum too much tonight, but just one of the biggest concepts that is so valuable is having a good organizational system for everything that you do, because there's nothing worse than like all of a sudden thinking of an article that you loved and you can't find it, or remembering an article that comes back to you and all of a sudden it's a year later and it's not as intuitive anymore, or you don't know how to find it anymore, or sometimes journals change circumstances and all of a sudden it's behind a paywall that it wasn't before. These are a lot of things that we'll talk about as you move into the next class. But that's one thing that if I could say anything about the literature review as a large recommendation, is just have a good organizational system from day one that you can rely on and build from, because that will save you so much misery moving forward. I mean, even I've had times like when I wrote the second article that I had talked about earlier, I went back to my original literature review and dug up articles that I didn't even use in my dissertation because I wanted to use it for that then. So having a good system will help you for not only the short while, but for quite possibly years and years to come on this topic. When we get to chapter 3, we've already got a pretty good understanding of everything that's going on around us with our study. And chapter 3 is all about giving that life, is giving a strong rundown of your methodology, which is in terms of if you're going to do a quantitative study, that's kind of rooted again numerically, that's kind of looking at more tangible experiences that can be kind of crunched and analyzed through data. If you're doing a qualitative study, which again, you're looking at more themes and words and feelings and more abstract things that are a little harder to quantify. And maybe you want to do long form interviews or focus groups instead of a survey or analyzing previous data. Or if you're really ambitious, and I always give credit to anybody who does this, the mixed methods choice, which mixed methods means you're going to do both a quantitative study and a qualitative study. And I always gain incredible respect for anybody that gets through the dissertation process doing mixed methods, because very frequently it's almost like doing 2 dissertations, but it's also about harvesting just an incredible amount of useful data and insight. I mean, mixed method studies are fascinating, but I also, again, give a lot of respect to anybody who goes through the coding process on both parallels, both kind of worlds. But for most people, you'll be quantitative or you'll be qualitative based on what works best for you and what works best for your study. And chapter 3 is all about laying the groundwork for what you're going to do, outlining how you're going to recruit your participants, how you're going to do your study, what steps are going to be taken to maintain validity throughout your study, make sure that everything that you're doing is credible and reliable, that nothing's being influenced by bias, both from you as a researcher or from your participants, and overall just creating a very good step-by-step roadmap for everything that you're going to do in the study itself. Chapter 3 goes hand in hand with the IRB because you share a lot of that step-by-step process with them. And at this point in the journey, as you kind of, for cohort 6, as you near the end of this year, you're really starting to look at your dissertation as a complete living thing that not only you've conducted a strong research study on and made a strong case for why it matters, but now you're creating this really worthwhile roadmap for everything that you're going to do. So once you're done that stage, you have chapter 3 ready, you move on and your study is conducted. You go out into the world, you gain IRB approval beforehand, and then you actually work with your participants, work with your data, whatever it may be, to conduct and develop your study. And then you're at a very exciting point in your whole journey, because not only have you formed this idea, you've gone out and done it, but now you are turning back and looking at your data and saying, what does this all mean? How does this connect to everything that I've done before? And how does it represent a strong address of the problem in practice and my research questions? And that's what you explore in chapters 4 and 5. Aaron asked a question, how long does it usually take to conduct the study and get data? I would say this varies a lot based on if a study is quantitative or qualitative and what the format of it is. So a quantitative study may actually go by fairly quickly. You may develop, say if you're doing a survey, you may spend a lot of time getting things ready, identifying the sample, the people that you're going to be sending the survey to. You might get all the logistics figured out and have the survey ready. And then you might send it out and you may get the amount of completes that you need within a week or two, or In other cases, it might be a lot harder than that. It might take a couple months. It might be hard to find maybe the sample that you dove into isn't enough, and then you have to find another sample and clear them and bring them into the mix. So quantitative studies as a whole, I mean, this is again just my understanding of it, but it usually tends to be that quantitative studies are a little harder to finish and finalize and fine-tune the process. But they are easier to conduct the study because so much of it is kind of automated once you're moving forward. With qualitative studies, that might take a little bit longer because you're going to be working with individual participants and interviewing them and recruiting them and everything like that. And that mileage may vary again based on who you're working with and what their availability is. In my case, it was about 2 months to find everybody and conduct them. I was kind of doing it on a rolling basis where I was recruiting participants as I was conducting interviews. And that's about how long it took me to find 9 people, schedule the interviews, and conduct the interviews themselves. But even that may change if, say, some people are doing a qualitative study, but you're working with people in your organization, or you're working with a sample that you already know. And when IRB gives you approval, you already know the 5 to 10 people that you're going to interview, and you can work from there. So towards that end, it's very differential. So many things in that DIP 1 to 3 year that cohort 6 is getting ready to move into are so subjective. Some people will fly through early stages. Other people hit complete walls. For me personally, my study went well. Thankfully had a good experience with IRB. I had the most miserable experience when it came to analyzing my data. I looked back at so many transcripts and 60,000 words worth of interview transcripts and things like that. And I lost my edge for a little while. That was an area where I struggled. I had a lot of difficulty just staying motivated in sorting my data and analyzing it and moving it all together. That was a pinch point for me. And that happens with everybody. Everybody's process in the dissertation will be different. There will be areas that you thrive at that will be so easy that you'll be like, I can't believe I did that already. And there will be other parts that will be naturally hard. And that's one thing that's really so worthwhile to keep in mind in this, is that everybody's study is different and that everybody's insight is completely different in terms of how things play out. And one of the things that can happen with the dissertation, and it's one thing that I'm going to mention later on, is that it's a marathon and not a sprint, and that you're not at a race with anybody else. And one of the things that can happen, I mean, it's sometimes natural in a cohort model, is a little bit of competitiveness and saying, oh, well, I got RB approval already. It's like, oh, well, I started my study again. And it doesn't matter. None of this competition matters. It's just we go through this long, arduous journey together as a cohort, and all of a sudden we're working individually and we're trying to give context to what we're doing. But I'd say maintain a healthy level of competition, but maintain that everybody also goes through this differently, and everybody's study is completely different too once you really move into this process. So once you're at this stage, you use chapter 4 is all about your results. It's about analyzing your data, figuring things out, and really just giving a very straightforward breakdown of your findings. Then chapter 5 comes along at the very end of your dissertation process, but it's also like the most interesting chapter, at least in my perspective, because you've already done your study, you already have your findings, and now you can do a really strong analysis of what this all means and why it matters to the world. And you make a strong case in it, not just on the research implications and merit of what you've done, but also the practical and practitioner-based findings and implications on what this means to the world right now. And that chapter is usually a really fun thing to put together. It often happens, when we're at the end of this journey and feeling a little burnt out, but it's so exciting to really go back and say, okay, now I'm an expert on this topic. I've analyzed things, and now I can really infuse my own voice into this to give it a really strong representation for everything that'll come. How's everybody doing? Cool. So one thing I believe Jovan mentioned right at the start that a lot of people are interested in learning more about is the dissertation share process. And once you have Oh, sorry, I was thinking different timeline. Once you move into your summer classes this year for cohort 6 or summer classes for next year for cohort 7, you will have a dissertation chair assigned to you. And what a dissertation chair represents is they are a member of the lead faculty that will be assigned to you as your sole coach and your sole advisor throughout your entire dissertation journey. To be a dissertation chair is like one of my favorite experiences in academia, period. And it is a very, very rewarding thing for us as chairs to work with you on a one-to-one basis. And what it really means is that once you start work with your chair, your whole experience with the program kind of shifts, because instead of having you'll have other classes, you'll have other input and advisors as you go on and finish up the rest of your coursework, but your dissertation chair is your sole kind of person throughout your whole experience up until and beyond the day that you defend your dissertation. Your chair will be your advisor. They'll be the ones to set deadlines and goals for everything with your dissertation as you develop it. They'll be the ones that you'll share ideas with, that you'll meet with frequently, that'll consult with you, that'll celebrate the highs with you, that'll be there for the lows, that will be there through everything that you go through, and will ultimately represent somebody who is in your corner 100% and is the #1 person that you can rely on throughout your dissertation journey. That's a really exciting thing. It's also a really unique experience to have, to meet with somebody and say, hi, you're going to be a huge part of my future for the next year and a half. I really hope we get along in this context. It's a lot. It means a lot to us as individuals, as chairs. It means a lot to you as students. I mean, I know because I've been on both sides. I know what it's like to have a dissertation chair assigned and to have my DIP students assigned to me also. And it is a very special relationship. And it's something that can really be so meaningful for you. For me, like, this is what started essentially. I mean, I was an adjunct instructor already. I was a teacher, but this relationship that I have and continue to have with Dr. Gonzalez, she kickstarted me as an academic in so many ways. And she was such an excellent mentor for me, not only throughout the dissertation process, but years later. I mean, she's helped, her and I stay in touch to this day, and I still check in with her with things, and I still respect and value her input so much for almost anything that I turn to her with. So that's a really great thing that happens out of the dissertation chair process, is that you're going to find somebody who can really serve for you as a coach and a mentor and a guide through all these more complex, nuanced areas of research and academia that you're going to be working with. I will mention that every DIP chair is unique. Every single one of us has a different style and a different approach for how we work with our students. And every one-to-one relationship with DIP chair to DIP students are always very different. Everybody changes depending on your needs, your dissertation, and what you're really looking for. You may love the idea of having somebody really close to you that works with you in a mentor capacity who you can really rely on. Or you may be somebody that is not so keen on research, not so keen on academia, really more in that practitioner mindset as kind of a practitioner leader over a researcher, and they'll be the person to help you kind of navigate the waters of research as far as you need and help you get through. So every relationship really is different. Some people are tremendously close. Other people like to be a little more hands-off, but your chair is all about kind of meeting those needs and understanding you and working with you. And that's one of the things that sets chairs apart and really makes the relationship very interesting and very dynamic. Because we work together through everything. You know, one of the first things I said with my two DIP students is like, we're going to see each other in our highs and lows, and we're going to see each other in our worst moments and everything right off the bat. And that's held true. And it's meant that we can understand each other better. It's different than the experience that you'll have with a lot of faculty members, and you'll be pushed in ways that you haven't before. Your chair is a big part of your study. They are a big part of who you are, and they will ultimately represent your biggest champion the day that your dissertation defense happens, because they're the ones that are saying, you're ready. you're ready to go forward, and they'll be at the point where they're comfortable and confident enough to go in your corner that day for the defense and say they deserve to be a doctor, they have achieved that level, and here's this great study that they're going to share with you all for your defense. So it's exciting. It's a little anxious. It's a lot to this idea, but it also really represents a very unique partnership, and it really represents a key concept that I'll drive home throughout this talk and many other talks that we have, that you're not alone in this journey, and that all the support resources that you have really do help and really can move you forward, especially when you run into ruts and challenges along the way. So I do want to just do a quick check-in now that we introduced the dip chair, now that we're talking about a couple other things. How's everybody doing so far? Does anybody have any questions, or how are we doing? Everybody good so far? Awesome. Glad to hear it. Glad we're rolling through. So I did actually just set up a nice segue for the next thing, because I was talking about the dissertation defense, and everybody always wants to know about the dissertation defense. Even though you're all very far off from this, there's always a lot of intrigue on this topic and what to expect and what's reasonable and what you can and can't do. So the dissertation defense represents the culminating experience that you will have before you become a doctor of education or in organizational leadership. It happens when you have fully completed your study, fully completed your dissertation paper, and are ready to move forward as ideally a doctor of education, and complete your experience in the doctorate program. Once you have written those 5 chapters and you've gone through the process of fine-tuning your study and revising your research and dotting and making sure everything is the best that it possibly can be and the most comprehensive and thorough it can be, then you're going to begin a conversation with your dissertation chair about scheduling your dissertation defense. And what the defense is a 30-minute presentation of your research, followed by a 15 to 20-minute question and answer segment by the dissertation panel. So the dissertation panel is frequently members of lead faculty, as well as the Dean of Education, Dr. Keenan, who will sit in and hear your presentation and hear a overall kind of crowning accomplishment achievement presentation on your research and what it represents. The dissertation panel always does receive your dissertation in advance. Usually about 2 to 3 weeks before your dissertation is in, your chair will ask you, send me your absolute final version, because that's what's going forward to the panel. And the panel reads it. We all take the time to read over your dissertations before the defense itself. And then the day the dissertation comes, and you present to us for 30 minutes a summary of your research, highlighting all 5 chapters, going over your key findings, going over the implications, and what your study means the most for. Then the question and answer segment is about us all taking some time to ask some questions about your study, asking things maybe about your experience, about your methodology, about different connections that you made, about your validity of the study itself, and how it serves and represents the organizational problem that you identified and the gap in research that you identified. It is a very nerve-wracking and exciting experience, and a very interesting day is all that I can say to you ahead of time. It is usually geared, we try to keep things as lively as possible. Usually, almost always, when somebody comes to this stage in their dissertation journey, they're going to defend successfully, and they're going to get through things. That's not to say that everything is perfect and that things sometimes don't go awry, and that there isn't more work that needs to be done frequently when somebody gets to this stage. But by and large, you can expect 3 different outcomes the day of your defense. Results may vary a little bit, but this seems to cover, in my experience, a lot of what can and can't happen. You will either successfully defend and officially become a doctor of education in organizational leadership. You'll be congratulated and referred to as doctor last name for the first time formally, which is an amazing moment. I was like, I said thank you like 50 times and just mumbled and then cried, and that was my experience. So everybody reacts differently. That's one of my favorite things on being on a panel, is seeing that reaction when everybody comes in. And that means your work is done, you're thorough, everything's finished. Another thing that might happen is that you may successfully defend. However, you may be requested to do further work. The panel may say, your dissertation is done, the content is good, but hey, we want you to go back and edit these things. We want you to analyze this a little bit differently. We want you to add in a little bit more in your literature review. Whatever it may be, it's feedback that came out of the panel itself and the discussion and your defense itself that are identified as, hey, you're a doctor of education, you've gotten through, congratulations, but you have a 2-month deadline or a 1-month deadline to make these changes and additions. And that's something reasonable that may happen. It usually happens frequently if somebody's needs to go through another proofing round with their dissertation, or their methodology is not thorough, or they need to just change something one way or another. But it does represent, it's still an amazing moment. It's still, you're a doctor of education, you did it, you got through the defense, and you're successful. You just need to put a little more work in before you can officially put everything on ice. The other thing that might happen is ultimately, if it's deemed that the dissertation isn't ready, you may be requested to resubmit after you revise your work a little bit further. But that, again, is by no means a death sentence. It just means it positions yourself to do a little bit further and to improve your work a little bit beyond that. One thing that happens in this moment, it's usually, it can be a tough moment when somebody's told this, but the reality of it is you're still going to be a doctor eventually, and you're going to spend the rest of your life a doctor. It just means, hey, you might have to do a little more work the next month or two before you can get there and fully celebrate. So, I mean, above all else, the thing that's consistent with the dissertation defense practice is once you're at this stage, you're either about to become a doctor or pretty close to becoming a doctor, and to the point where it's good to kind of ease off some of those anxieties and to celebrate a little bit as you move forward. So everybody okay with the defense itself? And again, this will be a topic that you'll revisit so many times over. And when the day comes, as you near in this, that's one of the great things that a dissertation chair will do, is help you to practice and refine your presentation, go through some practice questions to get you ready. Again, that's another role of us as chairs, is to really get you equipped for this presentation itself. So just want to hit on a couple other slides, and we can just open things up a little bit more as we move forward. And I just wanted to run down a little bit more about what I was talking about earlier when it comes to your dissertation topic. One of the things that really helps to make a dissertation strong is first that it's a topic that you're passionate about and knowledgeable about, or something that you really want to learn more about, something that really resonates with you and that is really kind of at the core of who you are. I think that's something that sets dissertations apart and makes things the most effective. I've worked with, friends of mine in the program that have kind of said, I just want to pick a topic that'll get me through as easy as possible and will move things forward. But the reality of it is there's no easy if it's a topic that you don't enjoy. No matter what, the dissertation is extraordinarily arduous. It will take a lot of your time and energy for 1.5 years. There is, it can be manageable. You can manage the stress and move through and make it a very enjoyable process, but it doesn't change the fact that dissertations will take a lot of time and energy from you over the next period until you're ready to defend. And towards that end, if you're choosing a topic that's 10% easier than something that you love, that 10% isn't going to be enough when you're really stuck in the mess of things, when you're lost in your literature review and don't know where you want to go, when you're having trouble getting IRB approval, when you're done your study and you're piled up on data that you don't really want to crunch. All of these areas are moments where your passion is going to help you a lot more than convenience or accessibility will. And that is why I'll always recommend that it's something that really matters to you as a person and that really connects to your core values as well as your career goals. Because ideally, your dissertation work is going to position you as a strong industry expert on whatever topic you're exploring. And what that really represents is kind of like how I outlined a couple papers that I'm doing. All of a sudden, I'm writing a lot of research on personal development, and I'm speaking at different places on personal development. I'm having opportunities to work in personal development plans in my consulting work too. And I knew that ahead of time that I wanted that to be a big part of who I was, and now it can happen. And again, if you're picking a topic that you hate, that you think is just going to be convenient, you're not going to want to talk about this a year later. You're not going to want to talk about it a month from now. So really having something that matters to you and really stands out is something that really, I think, helps everybody through the process. And the other thing is really just identifying a clear need for further research. And one of the things, to give a little cheat code, as you decide your dissertation topic and everything like that, if you run into any area of your dissertation that feels like, well, this has already been done in a lot of ways, but I still really want to do it. We live in a post-COVID world where almost every imaginable context has changed, and that we are on the very early stages of a cultural phenomenon and social shift that is going to be analyzed for decades to come. And towards that end, every lens has changed through the COVID lens. And I know COVID is a topic that has led to so much burnout for us that we don't always naturally want to think, I want to integrate COVID into my study too. But it is an area that is incredibly relevant. If you go into the Stockton Library Research Database and just search for new articles on any conceivable topic, almost anything is being spun now with a post-COVID spin. Everything about leadership has changed theoretically in the last couple of years because the culture around COVID rattled everything around us so much. So that is something, if you find yourself stuck on a topic that you really love, but it feels like there's no real avenue for you to go in, COVID will be something that will reinvigorate almost any research topic you can imagine. So that's just something I want to just sprinkle in there if that's something that does connect to you and an area that does interest you in analyzing things further. Like for me, I knew I wanted to study VUCA before March 2020, and then all of a sudden I was doing a study on VUCA while VUCA was happening on the biggest grand stage that had ever happened before. So I was like, yes, I'm not changing anything at this point. So everybody will play out differently in that experience, but that's just something I wanted to share. And you know, it's just so beneficial that you're picking something that reflects to you and resonates with you. And one of the best ways that can really move this forward that I'd recommend is, if you have an idea on a topic you want to explore, do a little literature review now on some of the articles that are being published currently. Like, again, if you're going on that Stockton research database, search by date added most recent to really see the areas that are being discussed in that field now and really better understand what people are doing and what you can do. Because that's something that can happen. You can come up with a topic that you absolutely love and feel like you're really breaking a lot of ground on, and then you do the literature review and all of a sudden it's been something that people have been looking at for 10 years. And that can really be difficult. So I'd say that's a really helpful thing as you move forward. So I do have just one other slide I just wanted to run down. I feel like I've inadvertently touched on a lot of these things one way or another as we went along. But again, just pursue what you love. This is, there's no sugarcoating that this is a very challenging and arduous experience. And one of the biggest things that we may do as academics and researchers in our lifetime. And towards that end, all of it is going to run so much more smooth and so much more exciting if you're pursuing it on something that you're really passionate about and that really connects well to not only who you are now, but who you want to be in the future. You really want to take that long view. Some people that are the most successful in their fields chose a good dissertation topic at the right time and ran with it. And think about yourself 10 years from now. Think about yourself 20 years from now. What do you want to represent as a researcher, as an academic, as a doctor of education? What do you want to consider yourself the strongest authority expert on, and build from that point? Because in a way, you can kind of like actualize your own career goals and dreams by doing the dissertation, because this is something contained. You know, there's so many things in our careers that we fight for and that we aim for and that we want to do that we don't get the opportunity for sometimes, or we don't find it in the right context. The dissertation is all your own to build it how you see fit. And then your context exists around it. You can create a career context for yourself through your dissertation experience because you're going to become an expert on this topic. And by doing that, it really will set you forward for everything that you do forward. So I think that's something that's really so valuable to keep in mind, is how to really make this something that you're going to care about 10 or 20 years ago, 10 or 20 years in the future, and set your career around. The next thing, and this is something that I say like almost every time I talk to my dissertation students, and that's this: the dissertation is a marathon, not a sprint. It is going to be something that will be made up and broken down into tons of different tasks and deadlines and objectives and everything that moves you forward as a person. But it's not just about that one deadline. It's not just about, oh my God, I need to get this done by May 10th or I'm screwed. It's not about, oh, I'm going to do this or I'm ruined. It is about the whole picture. And towards that end, it is so important for you to manage your own energy levels and your own focus throughout the whole experience, and understand that nothing is going to be done until you get to the end of that experience, and that only you can regulate yourself as best as possible. One of the biggest things that comes out of dissertations is the self-leadership that comes out. Your ability to regulate and manage yourself and understand yourself. I'm big, I want to do this paper. I think it came out of one of our talks in one of the dissertation defenses, but the idea of like the dissertation itself as a culminating heat experience that moves you forward as an individual. And I certainly feel like I felt that heat and that growth through the dissertation, even beyond the research that I did and everything else that went into it. So the other things to keep in mind, these are topics that will come up a lot in academia at this stage, is both the concept of imposter syndrome and the concept of burnout. Imposter syndrome, if you're not familiar with the concept, is the idea and the tendency for a lot of graduate students to struggle with their own identity at this stage. You guys are all suddenly finding yourselves at the culmination of any real academic journey. You guys are going to become doctors and complete your doctorates. And there is a very natural tendency that happens to many, many people, myself included, that you suddenly feel like, am I really this person? Do I deserve this? Do I deserve a stage at this point with all these other great academics and professionals and leaders? It happens to a lot of people. It can rattle your identity, especially when you get to the stage of the dissertation practice where you're not in class all the time, and you're more isolated, and you're working more in your individual sector, where maybe you're not treated like that academic researcher, and all of a sudden that identity starts feeling a little further away from you. This is a very real thing that challenges so many brilliant and talented people in academia, and it really is something that is good to be mindful of at the start. Because I can tell you now, I can tell it to everybody in our Zoom, anybody in any of our cohorts, you are valid, you do matter. You are here because you have earned it through everything that you've done in your career and everything that you will do. And do not let that doubt, do not let those bad moments eat away at you, because it can, and it can paralyze you, and it can be one of the worst things about the dissertation process, and something that is also very well documented. There are a lot of resources available for graduate and doctoral students that reach this stage that struggle with this idea, and it's something that you really want to actively fight. The other thing, again, burnout. You will have, especially moving into the DIPS 1, 2, and 3 classes, you will have so much leeway in what you do. You will have a lot of freedom in everything that you do, in terms of you'll have some timelines and everything like that. But if you need more time on something, that's okay. If you thought your study would take 2 months, but now it took 3, that's all right. Hey, you thought writing chapter 4 would take a month, but it only took you 2 weeks. There's so much flexibility towards that. Make sure that you're looking out for self-care, that you're looking out for yourself, that you're understanding this process is a long one and you do not want to drag yourself out through it. It's something that happens very frequently. Maybe you need to take some time off for mental health. Maybe you need to focus on other areas of your life. I'm sorry, let me get him. I have never done a Zoom without cat interference, and I had a feeling that was going to happen. I also like that he clicked to the last slide as I went through. The cameos are constant. I have transcripts of my dissertation that I had to redact and edit and say interruption by cat, commentary deleted. Like it's just an inevitability in my house, especially. I'm actually very stunned it took him that long to intervene. We'll see if we get the other one in a minute, because I have 2 and they both like to do it when they get started. So anyway, Matt's got a cat cameo too going on. So once you're at that point and you find out, how to manage yourself and everything like that, one of the other things to really keep in mind is that you want to play to your individual strengths and play to the things that make you who you are as an academic. Every single person hearing this, every single person that has gone through this program or any other dissertation has different strengths in everything that they do. Some of you are going to be really great at research, that the research process itself will be really intuitive to you, and you'll be really comfortable in that space, working with participants, working with data, putting your paper together. Other people will be really natural writers and will be really used to writing in long sprints and managing long, worthwhile papers like the dissertation. Some of you are just going to be really good with staying on task, staying managed, staying focused, and maintaining your own needs. Whatever it is, understand your own strengths and understand your own shortcomings too, as a natural part of this process. Nobody is perfect in all these areas, but the more that you have confidence in your strengths and utilize those as your advantage, the more that your shortcomings can be kind of mitigated and feel less important in the grand picture of things. My other last points, work closely with your dip chair. Your dip chair, as we've talked about, they want to do nothing more than to see you succeed and support you in every way you can. Some people get a little intimidated by the process. They don't want to reach out to their dip chair as much. They want to be a little more hands-off. And if that's what works best for you, that's fine. But if you're seeking that bigger relationship, but at the same time feeling like, oh, I don't really want to bug them, please bug us. We don't mind being reached out to. I mean, of course, within reason, and every dip chair will have a communication preference that they'll work with you on. But we want to be in touch with you. If things are happening, if you're struggling in this process, talk to us. You don't always need to feel like you need to portray this image of success and efficiency with your dip chairs. We're here for you through everything. And that's how we want to be and how we want to support you as best as we can. The second to last point is also a really other big thing. You guys have worked in cohort models your whole academic careers in this program, and all of a sudden in short order for cohort 6 and for a little over a year for cohort 7, you're going to be on your own. You're going to be not in that cohort model, at least formally anymore, and you're going to be working on a one-to-one basis. And towards that end, you don't want to lose sight to all the bonds and relationships that have gotten you this far. And some of the most successful students that have come through this program have been the ones that still reach out to their cohort, that still utilize their cohort and celebrate the successes of them and reach out to them and stay connected, because you don't want to lose that bond, even though everybody's individual experiences will be so different and your experiences and your dissertations itself will be so different. I had friends that I was doing a qualitative study, they were doing a quantitative study, our timelines were completely different, but we'd still stay in touch, just event and keep each other motivated and accountable for things. That's something that only your cohort can do and that nobody's going to force you to do. It's something that you're going to have to reach out and build as you go forward. And then the last point is kind of, as I touched on, the dissertation being such a key point of self-leadership, is that everything that you do to this point has brought you here, and that all the skills that you have as a leader and a researcher are what defines what you're going to do next. And everything that goes into what you've done so far will drive you forward if you use those skills and stay confident and really enjoy the journey and really celebrate what it is that you care the most about, for what's driven you to this point as an academic, and what you want to position yourself forward with in your career as a researcher and as an expert on this topic. So with all that said, I just want to move on and see if anybody had any questions, comments, how everybody's doing right now. I know I don't know if we're over time or under time. I know our time frame was a little open, but I just want to see how everybody's doing.
Before we jump into questions, can we just go back to like 2019 days and just unmute and give a round of applause? This was absolutely amazing. Whoever you want to respond,
It was.
clap, hand clap
Thank
emoji,
you so much.
or clap regular.
Thank
This
you.
was awesome. I'm like smiling so much right now.
Yeah, it was
So-
really helpful, Dr. Coopersmith. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for listening to me. I love just talking about this stuff. So I really enjoyed the opportunity and to share everything with you guys, because I this process meant a lot to me. This was a tremendous growth process in me as an individual and my career when I went through the dissertation myself. I never would have expected myself personally to be at this stage with where I was at in my dissertation. And I am, it's been an amazing opportunity, an amazing experience overall, for me to come together and to be able to be somebody that can help other people on their same journey.
All right, so who has questions?
I'll start.
Yeah.
What did you use for your like lit review to maintain your citations? Did you use like Mendeley or Zotero? Like what did you use to keep it all organized?
Specifically the citations, or just like all my literature review?
Yeah, like, you know, because they've been telling us throughout the program, like start collecting, start reading everything, start maintaining your databases so that when it's time to, you know, pull the specific ideas, you can recall it quickly. So you know, that whole point that you were like, oh, you read an article a year ago, there was a nugget there that you wanted to use. Oh, where did I find it? Like, how did you organize those ideas?
So I just posted the name of the software in chat. I used Scrivener, which may be familiar to some writers that have used it before. It is a kind of writer's management software, but it has a lot of really nice categorizing tools that you can use throughout just to stay organized. Like you can put everything in folders and subfolders. And from there, I just started really building things and really kind of just putting all my research together in the way that I could. Every single study that I had, hold on, let me see if I can get it open just to show you guys as an example. It's going to be kind of massive and unintuitive, but I can try. Can everybody see that on my screen, or did I like, is it just still the YouTube? I mean,
We still see the PowerPoint.
Okay, still the PowerPoint. All right. Zoom skills are rusty. Okay, so this is my dissertation in practice Scrivener, and it is quite loaded with a lot of different things at this point. But what it does is it's a software that just lets you organize every single conceivable thing and build a system for it. So yeah, I want to show you, like right down here, I would create, say if I was reading an article that really stood out to me well, I would pull out some highlights of the articles itself, some summaries. I would grab a citation of it. I would always write the art, you know, like the author and the year so that I had it organized. And I would build these little highlights on things that stood out to me in their phrasing. And I would write in bold these little subheaders that would kind of summarize what it was that was noteworthy, so that I could kind of pull this up at any point and see what they were doing. So this was just like one article, basically. And then I took this section and I had up here like a chapter 2 outline. And these are my 4 headers: the personal development, vertical leadership and personal development, andragogy and personal development, and personal development in a VUCA world. And under each one of these, this represents essentially all my subheaders of my chapter 2. And in each one of them, I would take, and I do it kind of, I have like, I'm like ridiculous with monitors. I have 3. I want to get a 4th one for my computer, but like I really advocate having 2 monitors for the dissertation, or having a good space for it, because it makes these kinds of things easier. But I would take, say, that article that we looked at earlier, Bandura on self-efficacy, and I would have it on the side. And I would pull out these little snippets that connected to me and put them in the subsection where it was relevant, to the point where I would eventually have this, which were breakdowns of all the research that I did on this topic and any connections based on it. And now I have, same way I had each of those studies broken down, I have now a summary of what they did. And now I've put them all those little sections that we all saw broken down in the one article at the first, I'd plug into the subheader that was relevant for them and just put them together. And when I highlighted it, it was something that I used. When I didn't highlight it, it was something that I didn't use. But when the time came to research, I had everything paraphrased already. I had all these snippets to work on. That was my system, but everybody's system is different. But I just love how Scrivener gives you all these nice tools to like sort with things and arrange things and build everything. Like even if you see I change like the icons, I would change them to check marks once I was done a section, just to keep accurate with things and put everything together based on that. In December 2019, I think that's when I was first starting out some things. I would move forward with some outlines, figuring out what I needed to do, quotes that I needed to cite. I ran into this thing early on with the dissertation. I didn't know that you had to list the page number when you quoted something. And I wrote like 30 some odd pages before I realized that. So that was a fun retroactive step for me, was going back on all these quotes and finding them again. But this is kind of a mess because it's kind of my mess and it makes sense to me. So I even have, oh, here we go with the exercise, diet, and meditation stuff. This was like something that I did in class, like back in 2019, and I think 6,500. So this was a lot, and it's a lot to look at and manage, but it's also, this was something that worked for me because I could put everything in it, and I could put everything in a way that was logical to me and form everything from there. So I really love Scrivener. That's always the platform that I recommend because it lets you sort things so efficiently and create good subheaders and organize your articles really nicely and keep everything that you need really contained.
And that's something that authors use to create indexes, right, Scrivener? So, I mean, it's one of the ways that folks create indexes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I've written novels using Scrivener. That's how I knew it, and I had the software. So to me, I was just really comfortable with it, and that's what really brought me to using it overall. Was just, it felt very logical to me because I was familiar with it. But everybody's system will work best based on what works for you. I don't know if it helped or not to show mine because it's like such a mess, but when I look at it, even like a year or two later, I can pick it up and be like, oh, well, I know what I sorted here. And so it's logical to me, even if it's kind of not as intuitive either. Every time I'm like, oh, I'll show you guys Scrivener, it's like, I don't want to use Scrivener now. But it really does work well, at least in what you want to use it for.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that was a little helpful for sure.
I have another question if anyone wants to jump in. We talked about in Dr. Gonzalez's lecture last Thursday regarding theoretical framework and conceptual framework. You know, like most of us have an idea of what we scratch the surface on what our topics are, but like the idea of creating the boundaries of a theoretical framework or conceptual framework is kind of like personally lost on me. So do you have a rationale or a thought process of how we can narrow down either one of those for our dissertation topics?
Yeah, so that is an area that it doesn't always feel intuitive. Some people do get set back and struggle with it a little bit. The theoretical framework, it's easier to kind of work with it with a knowledge of what the theoretical framework is first and then build into conceptual. But what the theoretical framework is a representation of the key theory or theories that guide your research. It's something that you're not, the only input you're going to have into it is essentially picking the theories that work for you. You're not going to make any large assumptions or connections with the theoretical framework. It is about highlighting the existing theory or theories on this issue and connecting it to the topic that you're doing. So a theoretical framework really works in just finding a strong theory that works well. A lot of people do transformational leadership. I did adult development in mind to look at the stages in which adults develop. Some people like to use the Cynefin framework if they're looking at something based on, some type of conflict or crisis, because that's such a good model for these things. The social learning theory, Albert Bandura, is also a very common one. The theoretical framework is really more just about a key theory or theories that already exist in the world of literature that are going to help support your study, that you can connect to your study. That's really what the theoretical framework represents. The conceptual framework gets to be a little more fun and gets to have a little bit more of your own creative touch and your own study gotten by it. You'll use existing research to develop your conceptual framework, but your conceptual framework is created by you. It is some type of roadmap or representation of your study itself and a connection to the key concepts that it's all about. So I gave the example, so just to give a case for what it looks for me, my theoretical framework's about adult development, because I knew I was looking at not just personal development on a general level, but really understanding the ways in which we can tap into greater capacities of thinking and doing and acting. So that was my theoretical framework. But I knew the heart of my study was really in the relationship between personal development and vertical leadership development. So what my conceptual framework was a 5-step connection of key concepts of personal development and vertical leadership development to show the ways in which they overlapped. So I looked at 5 key principles, and if I draw a blank on this, I'm really going to do bad on my future presentations, which were the development and application of skills, continuous improvement, self-efficacy, self-exploration, and self-awareness. So they were 5 principles that I found through my literature review that there was no set research linking those 5 things together before me. That was my own assumptions. That was my own analysis into this topic that helped me to create a conceptual framework on them. And those 5 elements drove so much of what I did. The theoretical framework is going to drive so much of your literature review, but more often than not, your conceptual framework will be a driving element in your study itself. So for me, so many of the questions of the interviews that I did were geared around those 5 themes. We're looking at what skills they developed, how they built themselves forward, and how they developed things. How I was able to adapt things further. Whereas the theoretical framework is more or less making a strong case for why your study exists on a theoretical basis and how you're going to contribute to already existing theories. How did
So
I
those,
do?
yeah,
Okay.
that's really helpful. So those conceptual frameworks that you tied together, you had literature on each of those independently.
Yes.
That you referenced.
Yes, I was able to, in my conceptual framework, cite sources on why these 5 things exist in both in personal development and vertical development. But I was the one that was saying these 5 things exist and these 5 things matter, and I'm going to observe them. As opposed to the theoretical framework where you don't have that same leeway. Conceptual frameworks really refer to more of what you're forming and creating with your study itself. So I hope that helped. That was a topic that's always a tricky topic. It's hard to separate the two, especially when you first learn about them. And I struggled with it a lot. So like if I was able to explain that well, that's like I'm going to pat myself on the back when we get off Zoom, because that'll be the first time I've eloquently been able to break that down myself. It's tricky. A lot of these things are tricky. A lot of the terms can throw people off. And that's one of the things that I said, like right from the start, there's no wrong questions with these kinds of things. There's a lot of terminology that exists in these things. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't quite understand that. And can you explain that further? And that's a big thing about being a chair and having a chair as a resource. How's everything else going? Any other questions?
I can keep asking questions.
No, take them out, fire away.
So, as you know, all my questions are geared to how you did things, and hopefully we can get some inspiration of how to do it for ourselves. Did you set out time every day? did you have like, are you like a morning person? Did you like, have a routine, get up, read a couple articles, write a little bit of something? Or did you down to the wire? All right, you created benchmarks for yourself and just stayed on track. Well,
Um,
what do you recommend for us just getting started?
I'm kind of a binger. I would say these 3 days I'm doing nothing but dissertation, and we would do nothing but dissertation and go about my work on my other days, essentially. That was how I worked best personally, because I really like to get lost in something, especially with writing, that I need to just dive in. I can't do the distractions, and I struggle with doing things piecemeal. It's the same thing like when we were first talking about the competencies. I could never like just chip away at the competencies. I had to do 5 in one day, or just binge them whenever I needed to. So that works best for me, but other people have different approaches. One of my dissertation students now is very big on, especially when she was doing the literature review, she was all about like an article a day. And I was like, I give you so much credit, because I can't find myself in that headspace on a regular basis. Even to this day, like whenever I'm writing an article, it's like, okay, I'm going to get all my work done for the week, and then I'm spending the weekend on the article. So that's what worked best for me. But it's always the style that works best for you is always what's going to work. That's really what I would say. Some people feel best when they're under pressure and under deadlines. And if you're at that point, you can have a dip chair that'll give you really set deadlines to keep you motivated, to keep you really going forward. But other people will like more freedom, and other people, especially depending on your personal life, your work life, and things like that, everybody's going to approach things differently. I give tremendous respect to anybody who's able to chip away at it day by day. As you mentioned with the morning person, I'm personally not a morning person. I'm like always slow to get rolling in the morning. So I feel like I usually do my best work in the afternoon, or even when I'm done teaching, I'll come home and work in the evening, kind of thing. So I think it's everybody's process is really just depends on what works best for you. But I would say one way or another, the most important thing is momentum. Even if you're somebody that, like me, likes to pick and choose their battles and get started when they're working, make sure that you're doing it, because it's very easy to take a week off or take 2 weeks off and be away from this for a little while and think, wait a minute, what was I doing? And why did I do this? And if you're at that point, again, that's going to cause you more agony than the process needs to. That's one thing I also like to do. Another tidbit, I didn't, oh, here we go. Anyway, another thing that I really like to do with Scrivener is I'll keep a change log and keep notes of what I did on any given day. And if I am saving version 7.2 of my dissertation, I want to make a note to my future self on why it was 7.2 and why it was relevant to make a new file. Keeping lots of copies and staying organized with your versions is just another thing that'll just help so much.
I have a question. So as a dip chair, but also as someone, from what I recall in a previous conversation, you were helping your cohort members, with some of their writing, or at least helping just to get them along as well. What have you seen that are some practices to stay away from? Like, if you do this, it's not going to lead to a good result. What are like the top 2 to 5 things that we should all stay away from doing to be successful in this process?
The first thing I would say is just always understand that a rough draft is exactly a rough draft, and that nothing is more valuable in the writing process than words on page. That I think the paralysis that can come out of thinking that you want to get work done but are not able to get it done actively can really set people off the most, the absolute hardest. Another thing that really comes to mind is not understanding APA version 7 style from the start. I'm sorry, he's trying to set a record now. There's so many things that can be said about APA and understanding it, but if you don't understand how to do citations right, if you don't understand how to put things together on a very, all right, there we go. Sorry. I'm just going to turn the camera because there we go. Never mind, he's still on camera. I'll just leave it. So there are so many things that will come out of the process with APA style. And if you have a good understanding of how to write in it from the beginning, it will make things so much easier because you won't have to stop halfway through, or you won't have to potentially rewrite a large part of your dissertation because your citations weren't correct. So I'd say that's something. Everybody treats APA style differently. A lot of people are like, well, I don't really want to do that. I don't really like this kind of set of rules. I write how I write. And it's like, don't fight the system. You're going to have to use it eventually. It's more beneficial early on to buy the book, keep the book handy with you, reference it. The book is better than just searching on Google. I say that as somebody who spent most of my time working on my dissertation searching on Google, like APA version 7 headings, or how to do a citation that's over 40 words. It is really helpful to just have the physical book on you to keep that handy. So that's a recommendation that I'd have. Absolutely. The other thing that I would say really is huge is understanding the difference between paraphrasing and plagiarism. It's something that a lot of people run into, especially with working on a larger scale dissertation and larger scale research, especially if you haven't done it in a few years, that some people don't know how to draw the line between when should I quote something, when should I put something in my own voice, when should I understand this? And that is not something that you want to potentially derail or damage your doctoral journey. And it's really helpful to understand that process thoroughly and understand the boundaries of what it means to cite a source and work with the source versus using their exact language in something, and how to back that up and stay organized. Even people with really good intentions have fallen into that pitfall because, again, the literature review concept is so robust, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of your notes and put everything together in the right way. And then I think, you know, one of the other things that just comes to mind with just tips, things that people have had, is just have confidence in yourself. It's intimidating. This whole process, every single person that you run into will be challenged in ways that they didn't expect. And I think one of the trickiest things that comes out of that is to let your shortcomings get the best of you and to affect you in a way that doesn't feel positive, or that doesn't like keep you solid as a person. And it's something that happens when people struggle with, say, for example, writing and, oh, I'm a bad writer, I can't do this. And all of a sudden you're stuck in this loop, and your ideas are great, and all you need to do is really put them on paper. And it's okay if you're not the best, and we'll refine it and work with you and develop things further. And worst comes to worst, you can hire an editor at the very end. Whatever it may be, just keep moving forward. You know, don't worry about the success of others. Don't worry about the expectations you have on yourself. Just keep making progress. Just keep chipping away and stay on top of the journey, because that's what's going to move you forward ultimately.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Matt asked a question on if the dissertation defense is going to stay on Zoom or if there's plans to return in person. I actually do not know currently. I know that we are currently doing them in Zoom for the time being. I don't know if something will switch in the future or what the context will be. I will say one thing: if the day does come and you don't want to necessarily present on Zoom, you want something, it doesn't quite feel right. When I came to my dissertation, I was like, for reasons that you're already seeing, I do not feel like I can do a conductive presentation that's very reliant on time in the same space where I work. And one thing that I did that I absolutely loved was I got a room at Stockton, and I did the presentation from like a lecture podium where I felt comfortable in my element, and it felt a little nicer. We still did it over Zoom, and there was nobody else in the room with me. I didn't even let my family sit in on it. They had to wait outside in the hall because I was just like, we're not doing this. But that was good to get me in the groove. And other people have followed that model too since then. If the Zoom concept doesn't excite you too much, and if that still is the format when you guys go to defend.
Thank you so much for this.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate everybody coming in. And one reason that I left the screen share on is that I really do want to stay in touch with you guys. I have my contact information right there. And, one of the biggest things for us in the LEAD program, for all of us as faculty members, is we want to be there for you guys for everything and help you guys in any way that we can. And towards that end, if there's ever anything that comes up that you have questions about, that you just have something that you're unclear about, just know that you have us as resources, and you can always reach out to me, you know, even if we don't talk for 6 months or a year. I mean, you'll see me, because I'm going to be reaching out to cohort 6 in particular soon, for a couple things. And you'll have you'll have us in our wheelhouse, but just know you always have us in any way that you need us. Just reach out, send the email, send a text message, give a phone call, whatever it may be. And we're always happy to help. And I, again, am just really thankful to OLA and for everybody for putting this together and giving me the opportunity to share this with you guys. And I definitely look at this as a start of a conversation that we can have moving forward as you guys go through your journeys. And I'm looking forward to working with you guys all more.
Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to ask or share? Take that as a no.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you so much on behalf of cohort 6 and cohort 7, right, Erin? I can say that.
Absolutely.
On
Yeah.
behalf of OLA, we are so thankful. What I really appreciate, and I think everyone else may have really appreciated as well, is the perspective that you gave, right? You mentioned being on both sides and being able to speak from the angles of being an alumni, which I didn't mention in the beginning, my apologies, but being an alum of the program, you know, now even serving as faculty and as a dip chair, you're able to kind of see and experience firsthand all of the struggles, you know, that we may encounter at some point, especially the imposter syndrome. That hit home, and that's a whole nother conversation. And I believe another session that needs to happen at some point, because we may not all verbalize it out loud, but I know individually, you know, within our silos and our little groups, folks have shared those, you know, those sentiments and those challenges. So I appreciate you bringing that up tonight and just reminding us that it is normal to feel that way and that it's just a part of the process. So thank you for that, and also the focus on self-care. So just thank you again from all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe at some point we can do, especially when you're in the process, really feeling it, we can do a little segment on like self-care and mental health through the dissertation process, because I pushed myself too hard during that process. Because I mentioned to you, I took 2 months off, and then I wanted to get caught up and be early, and I drove myself a little nuts during that period. So that's one reason why it resonates to me. Plus I do a lot of work in mental health fields, so that always matters to me. So if there's any help that I can give in that area in particular, that means the world to me.
Everyone watching this, you heard him say it, so we can definitely look forward to a follow-up.
You've got me locked down in the future for that. And anytime I can help out with anything, I really had a lot of fun tonight. So thanks for thinking of me and reaching out to me. This was a great experience. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we need to hear from you more often. Like, this was awesome. I just can't say that enough. So thank you again. I don't want to take up any more of everyone's time, but thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to the folks who are watching this at a later time. We hope that you took a lot away from this. And as you can see right now on the screen, Dr. Coopersmith, his information is on here. Don't hesitate to reach out, especially cohort 7 as you're beginning this process early on. So yeah, soak it all in and let's keep this going. You mentioned momentum, so let's keep the momentum up as we work through all of this stuff that's ahead of us. Awesome. Well, thank you guys.
Can we give one more round of applause?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you again.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Take care. Bye. Thanks again.